Imagine if somebody followed you around for the next month and they looked at everything, your calendar, your phone, what you entertained yourself with, where you went, how you spent your money, how you used your time. What would they walk away thinking is the most important thing in your life? Would they think it's your family or your career or your physical fitness? Those are all really popular answers, but here is probably the uncomfortable question. Where would God fall on that list? Not by what you say, but what you do. See, this is exactly what happened to Daniel in Daniel chapter 6. His enemies followed him around. They investigated him. They looked for places where they can find fault in Daniel, and what they found is kind of surprising. Daniel chapter 6 begins shortly after Daniel chapter 5. At the end of chapter 5, Belshazzar dies, the Babylonian kingdom falls, the Persians come in and take over. There is a new king, a new emperor, a new form of government. And if you've been following along in this series, you know that the question that's been hanging over this entire book is that God is sovereign over all the events in history. But now that there's a new kingdom, can they do what the Babylonians can never do? Can King Darius and King Cyrus accomplish what King Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar could not do? Can they overthrow the plans of God? I think we know the answer, but let's see what the scriptures teaches. Open up your Bible to Daniel chapter 6 and let's take a look together. It tells us here that it pleased Darius to set up over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. We see here that Daniel stands out among his peers, and we have to ask ourselves, why? Why is he so distinguished? It can't be because he's young. He's almost 80 years old at this point. It can't be because he's powerful. He still is technically a captive, exiled from Judah and taken to another country. But it's because Daniel is different. It's because he is trustworthy, and his record shows that God backs him up. The king is so impressed with Daniel that it seems like he's planning on placing him over the entire kingdom. And needless to say, some of Daniel's peers are not too happy about that. Let's see what happens. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. So we see that jealousy is driving these men to try to bring down Daniel, a man of God, and they search his work, they search his decisions, they search his character, they try to find dirt, and maybe for the first time in history, they find the one true honest politician that has no dirt on him. The verse continues to say, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. They come up empty. They have nothing to show for all their investigation. Listen to what they say in the next verse. We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. So let me explain what this means. These men were going to try and trap Daniel by using his own personal convictions. They were going to set up a plan that they knew Daniel would fall into because they knew that Daniel would not cross certain lines. Think about that. They knew exactly what to do to make Daniel fall into this trap because Daniel had showed consistency of character. They knew the exact steps that his faith was going to take him. And the reason for that is because Daniel's faith is not something that he put on only in difficult moments. Daniel's faith was something that shaped his entire life. And while that is awesome to see in another believer, we have to stop and ask ourselves, do other people see that in us? Do other people see the consistency in character that we claim to have? If someone wanted to learn what's the most important thing in our lives, would they have to ask, or would the evidence speak for itself? Starting in verse 6, the officials come up with this kind of ingenious plan. They convince Darius to sign a law that says that no one can pray to anyone except for the king for 30 days. And of course, Darius accepts because often people in power love when people make their ego feel much better. But look what happens in verse 10. It's one of my favorite verses in the chapter. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. And I love that last portion there, as he had done previously. For Daniel, the opposition is there. The trap has been set. He finds out that they've been scheming and plotting behind his back, and nothing changes. He doesn't organize a protest. He doesn't go running, hiding for his life, or make some big public declaration. He simply continues to do what he always had been doing. That phrase, as he had done previously, lets us know that Daniel did not go to God in prayer because there was a new obstacle, or because things suddenly got hard in his life, or because he needed God to intervene on his behalf. And while I'm certain that he did pray for those things, Daniel prayed as he had always been praying. The display of courage and faith that Daniel will have in this chapter is not a result of this one-time prayer that he does when he finds out the news and opens up the window and prays toward Jerusalem. The faith and courage that he is going to display are the fruit of decades of private consistency and trust in God. And I don't want you to miss this, because we know the ending of the story and our kids know the ending of the story. In fact, it's one of the most retold Bible stories of all time. But Daniel didn't know the ending of this story. He had no kind of affirmation that God was going to save him from the lions then. He just knew in who he trusted. And he knew that God is worthy of obedience no matter how the story ends. Look at verse 16. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you." You see, there is evidence that others knew of his faithfulness to God. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Did you notice who is the person who is losing sleep here? It isn't Daniel. It's the king. Darius is the one that is fasting. Darius is the one that cannot sleep. This powerful man had to learn that even his power had its limits. He was constrained by the document that he signed, by the laws of the Medes and the Persians that could not be changed. And despite him not wanting to cast Daniel into the lions, then he had no choice. And so he spent all night grieving and thinking about how this beloved man was probably being mauled to death by these hungry lions. The king had no power to save him. His own laws had trapped him. But Daniel's God was never trapped. Let's look at verse 19. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And in verse 21, then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Notice who is receiving the glory from Daniel's lips. Not Daniel, not luck, not coincidence, but God. And that's because this chapter is not really about Daniel surviving the lions then. It's about whether or not God is still sovereign. And the answer is obvious. In verse 25, we see that King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." The chapter begins with King Darius signing a decree that everyone must pray to him, but it ends with Darius writing another decree saying that everyone needs to know that Daniel's God is the living God who rescues. And if that's not a reversal, I don't know what is. It absolutely shows the sovereignty of God over human affairs. The same thing that happened with Nebuchadnezzar, the same thing that happened with Belshazzar is now happening with Darius. Because kings might change, empires might rise and fall, but God remains on his throne forever. That has been the message of Daniel all along. Whether it was 3 young men being rescued from a fiery furnace, or Daniel being rescued from the lion's den, or just them prospering in a land that was created to change them, God has always been in control over every king, over every empire, over every persecution, every law, every circumstance. So let's go back to the question that I asked at the beginning. If someone followed you around for a month, what would they find out about you? Daniel's enemies didn't have to ask because his life already reflected the answer. But I just want to stress that Daniel's consistency here is not the hero of the story. His consistency pointed to the God that can be consistently trusted. And while Daniel chapter 6 certainly challenges us to try and be faithful the way Daniel was faithful, I think it's also encouraging us to trust in the God who is just as sovereign today as he was that day when he shut the mouths of the lions. Because when your faith rests upon the God that is sovereign, then we can trust. Then we can be consistent, no matter what may come. Thanks for watching. If you found any value in this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Let me know what your thoughts about this chapter were. Next week, there is a shift in the book of Daniel, and we begin to look at some of the most confusing and interesting and kind of nerve-wracking prophecies in the book of Daniel and about the end times. If you've been following along in the series, you know we're in for a great study. Thanks again for watching. I'm Eric. See you in the next study.